So I joined the Marine Corps Reserves when I was 17. I did not have any grand plans. I did not know what I was going to do with the rest of my life. I didn't get deployed, didn't see anything crazy. When people say thank you for your service, I don't really know what to say. But on the other side of the military service, specifically with transitioning out to becoming in the Marine Corps Reserves to fully civilian, one thing that I noticed that was very eerie and weird was the complete lack of structure associated with the civilian world. When I got out, there was no place to transfer my skill set. There was no direction, no pipeline, no structure to be able to take my skills that I learned in the military and then apply them in a meaningful way where I could make a living out of them on the civilian side. One thing that I think is worth noting is that there's no real equivalent to being in the military to being on the civilian side. Because there's no real equivalent, I found myself fighting this kind of gravity, this black hole of like mediocrity or being average. And I think that a lot of other people, especially now having gone through grad school a couple of times and being a counselor for 7 or 8 years, what I realized is that a lot of other people are also fighting that lack of meaning. They're trying to find ways to balance paycheck, building a family, purpose, meaning. What am I supposed to do with the time that I have on this planet? And I think because there's no one telling you what to do, there's also no clear target, no clear enemy, nothing to really objectively push against in the civilian world where a lot of people live, myself now included. I think that it's very easy to fall back on what I call the default life. The default life is not inherently good or bad. It's just kind of like a lukewarm existence. And I don't know about you, but I hate that. I hate the fact that our default is to kind of like settle into, to fade into the average, the masses. I don't like that at all. While I completely understand it, yeah, we got to pay the water bill, the car bill, the electric bill. It doesn't make it meaningful. It doesn't make it something where at the end of the day you can be like, hey, I can hang my hat on this. I'm making this video as a part of a broader series, even though this one's a little bit different. The other ones are more about emotional patterns and how to break some of those patterns, the quiet ones that kind of dominate our life. This video is a little bit more specific towards kind of escaping that default life. So if you are someone who doesn't hate their job, but you don't love it, who thinks that you could do a hell of a lot more, your relationships are good, but you kind of feel stressed out and irritable and you don't really know why, this video is for you. So what I would like to do in this video, which won't be long, is to kind of point to 2 different pieces of evidence of data sets that have been kind of aggregated over the years, and maybe share a couple of personal stories, because I think that settling into that default life, that natural progression of wife, kids, job, providing, settling, I think that we can sacrifice a lot. Honestly, I think that we can sacrifice too much in that process. And I have 2 daughters. I'm married, 2 daughters. What I think is that it's actually not a good, what's the right way to put this? I don't think it's leading by example. I don't want my kids to see me not just stressed out, but I don't want them to see me fighting so hard for a mediocre life. I don't want the example that I set to be that I give everything for just enough to get by, because I don't want that to be how they live their lives. I think that they deserve a hell of a lot more. And if you have kids, I think that you probably believe the same. So this video is really an effort to kind of lead from the front. And I think that the best way to do that is by spearhead some of the harder conversations, which is, why is it that I feel a little bit stressed, a little bit irritable, and maybe I don't know why? And I think that at the heart of it, and maybe this goes into one of the first pieces of evidence, is that our jobs do suck the soul out of a lot of our lives. So the first piece of data that I got is something called the Economic Conditions of America. If it's not that exactly, it's something very close. But what it is it is a aggregated set of data about the survivability of the average American. I think that over the past couple of years, a lot of people, myself definitely included, have begun to feel inflation a hell of a lot differently than maybe earlier phases of life. What this chart, what this report essentially says is that you don't need to just work hard to get by, to keep the lights on, to provide food for the people that you love. You need to work harder than before to pretty much do the same amount. And I think what people miss in this is that it speaks to something a hell of a lot deeper in our country than just money, than just economics. And what I think is actually happening is that it broke a contract that we had, like a quiet kind of invisible contract that we had that says this: if I work hard, I should be able to afford a good life. If I work my ass off, I should be able to get the things that I want. Maybe it won't get me a mansion, a lake house, whatever it's gonna be. But if I do work hard, the agreement, the subtle handshake of being an American is that I can actually have a life that I want, that's good enough, that I can work hard all day and I can hang my hat on this day, on this day's work. what this chart says is that now that's not good enough. That contract is actually broken. That shit's torn up. So now your work needs to be harder, and it's still not going to be enough. And I think that breaks the psyche of a lot of guys who inherently want to work hard, who are willing to sacrifice, who are willing to put their asses on the line and give up a lot for their families. So now we find ourselves in this position where not only are we settling into the default life, but we actually have to work twice as hard for what once we needed to just work hard for. So now we're kind of fighting this thing on two different fronts. Not only do we have the natural gravity of this default life to kind of get a job that, maybe we would call mediocre, but now that's actually not even good enough. Now that thing that we don't even really like, we don't feel too passionate or enthused about, now that job is actually not good enough anymore. So economically, it's insufficient, but also psychologically, it is insufficient. So now you have a two-pronged assault on the average guy who's just trying to get by. Here's a second piece of evidence that is coming from a source that I now severely question after the pandemic. Maybe you do too, I don't know. But the WHO, the World Health Organization. So I'm a counselor, I'm a mental health counselor by trade. Like I said, after the military, I found a job that, and by the way, I do actually enjoy being a counselor. The one-to-one work, I really, really enjoy. But there is a shit ton of administrative bloat that comes along with my profession that I just don't like. And every job has that. Hence me starting my own one-to-one coaching business on the side. But anyway, back to the WHO, the World Health Organization. They have a shit ton of data on clinical depression. There is a word in mental health called underdiagnosed, which is exactly what it sounds like. You might not meet all the fancy criteria for something like clinical depression. It might not be the case that you don't want to get out of bed in the morning, or that you don't find joy in the relationships that you really care about, or your natural interests. But there are two pieces to this data set from the World Health Organization, one being the sheer amount, the gross volume of the amount of men globally who do feel depressed. So that's number one. Number two is that point of men being underdiagnosed with depression, but that's very difficult to quantify. Here's the point. So much of what goes underneath the radar for the average guy's experience, just day-to-day experience, getting up, going to work, coming home, kissing the wife and the kids, so much of that is with the additional burden, the additional psychological burden of knowing that it might not be enough. Even for the people whose job it is to collect data in terms of how many people this impacts and the depth to which it does impact the individual person, don't really know how to make sense of this. So for the average dude, we kind of come back to this really crucial conversation of, what do I do about this? This is a conversation that I have with my wife regularly. This is what happens when you lose faith in that contract of, if I work hard, I should be able to build the life that I want. So now that we know there's this kind of quiet assault going on for our livelihoods, economically and psychologically, we're kind of left in this position of, it's not just a discipline problem, it's also a creativity, a self-awareness problem. We need to be aware of other potential avenues, other potential courses of action that might be able to help us navigate this kind of culture that doesn't really serve us after that narrative breaks down of, hey, go to high school, get good grades, go to college, get good grades, go to the military, whatever, and then you're good to go on the other side of that initial investment. That's no longer the case. So we need to update the narrative to say, hey, if you do want to be successful, because the goal really hasn't changed. You want to provide for your wife and kids. You want to keep a roof over their heads. You want to keep the lights on, fed, all the stuff that I want as well. But we need to update the narrative. We need to figure out what are the other tools that we have in our toolbox. So my challenge for you is, what does that actually look like in your individual life? For me, that's starting a business. For me, that's waking up at about 4:15 every single day. That's the Bible. That's physically training. That's keeping my mind sharp. Since we know that economics and psychology are tied together, that your well-being is tied to how much is in your bank account, as it is for me, by the way, and that's no different than the hunter-gatherers, where instead of money, it was food, because money nowadays in the modern landscape, money is a proxy for physical security. Now we need to figure out, well, what do we do about this? What do we do now that we know that the modern economic landscape is actually choking us? We have to be able to receive that problem, that really complex beast of a problem, and not freak out. We need to be able to keep the faith. We need to be able to keep a good attitude in front of our kids. And that's not just fake it till you make it. There was a theory that came out called the social learning theory. This is decades before my time kind of came up. And what that pretty much said was that kids learn by who their parents are, not what they say. So what that means is the decisions that we make, the behaviors that we output on a daily basis, that is the image of who our children will grow up to be. If we are lazy, our kids will be lazy. If we are hard workers, our kids will be hard workers. If we are emotionally regulated, aware, disciplined, our kids will also be those things. It is on us to figure out how to untangle this shit show of a problem that has been given to us, and what a blessing that is. Because if we can conquer this, if we can keep the faith and actually figure this out, if we can remain faithful, our kids will know how to deal with some of the most challenging problems that life has to throw at them. So I'll leave you with a word of encouragement. Now that we've identified what the problem is, the scope of how it's kind of imposing itself on us, I want to figure out what are the actual practical, tactical steps that you can take today to start chipping away at this challenge. And I'll share with you what that actually looks like in my personal life. For me, that's actually writing things down, not because it solves any problem, but it slows things down. And when I am presented with a really big, complex problem, I run the risk of overwhelm, of feeling overwhelmed. So my biggest asset is the ability to kind of slow things down, figure out the landscape, and kind of see where I can get my footing. So from a tactical lens, I encourage you, write 2 to 3 different courses of action down that deviate from the conventional path. Whatever you wanted to go to college for, whatever your MOS was in the military, whatever that looks like on the civilian side, we now have this challenge, this problem, where we need to figure out how are we going to translate that in a different capacity than we originally thought. The problem is real, it's not going away, and it's most likely coming for our kids. Therefore, I am heavily incentivized to find a creative solution to the problem that we have. So leave me a comment, let me know what you actually think. Let me know what some of your courses of action are and how you plan to implement them. What I like to do when I coach people or counsel them in a clinical setting is really figure out what are your highest points of leverage? What are the things that are going to get in the way of those initial tactical steps? When you're able to identify what are your biggest barriers, whether they're external or internal, and in my personal belief, I think a lot of those are internal, you're able to figure out solutions to those challenges, to those barriers. Perfectionism, overthinking, lack of faith, uncertainty, all these psychological problems that really do mess with our ability to get things done. Those are the issues that are most worth your time. So I'll leave you with this. I have a couple of links in my bio. One is a Calendly link. If you want to run your specific situation by me, your strengths, your areas of weakness, where you need to develop, book a call. It is completely free and you will walk away with clarity in at least 1 to 2 actionable steps to break away from the default life. In addition, for the curious minds, there is also a link below that called the 7 Profiles. The 7 Profiles is a free guide and you will download a free assessment to figure out the 7 most common psychological profiles that I see as a counselor. What it is a good baseline to figure out why you do what you do and why you may not do the things that you know you should. So come back, watch this video again, leave me a comment, let me know how you are fighting back against the default life.